Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Eric has joined me back again because he is multifaceted in a lot of areas of research. So we kind of I think we covered almost every single topic. At one point, we'll have to swing back to the little submarine that exploded underwater when they were trying to look at the Titanic, because I still have questions about that, a lot of questions. Um, but we came here to talk today to talk about Howard Hughes, mostly because I see that this billionaire has a lot more influence than necessarily what we might have talked about, but you've kind of opened me up to some areas that are interesting about his character. Um, so I wanted to learn more about Howard Hughes's background. First of all, obviously does your knowledge come from James Ellroy, the stuff that you read about or wrote about?
Partly, but I mean, there are a number of quite good biographies and novels about Hughes. Luke Davis, a good Australian writer, has written *The God of Speed*, which is a very good psycho biographical novel analysis of Hughes. And there are things like *Empire* and *Howard Hughes: The Hidden Story*, and then what's his name, Porter. He writes all these encyclopedic exposés about sexual proclivities in Hollywood. He's written a 950-page sexual biography of Howard Hughes called Hell's Angels. And again, so much of this stuff is not substantiated, but some of it's just like too good not to be true. And some of it sounds right. Like at one point, for example, that Hughes was threatening Humphrey Bogart with death or extreme physical harm unless unless Bogey handed over his contacts in the gigolo underworld and became Howard's number one procurer of young boys, apparently, and because Bogey went both ways at one point, according to Porter, the author. I'm trying to remember the guy's first name. It may come up later, but anyway, it's called Hell
Kenneth
Angels by.
Porter?
Sorry.
Kenneth Porter?
Not certain. It's kind of embarrassing. He kind of caught me off guard. I mean, you can Google it if you want to, but it's definitely Porter Hell's Angels, massive sexual biography of Howard Hughes. So yeah, there's something going on everywhere with him. But yeah, so it's full of stories and anecdotes like
Oh,
that.
Paul Porter.
Paul, are you sure it's Paul Porter?
It says Paul Porter, founder. Pre I don't know. No, oh, this is an actual member of the Hells Angels.
Yeah, no. It's another guy. So enter Porter Howard Hughes Hell's Angels.
Oh, Darwin Porter.
That's it. I was going to say Darren Porter, but I knew
Howard
that.
Hughes, Hell's Angel, America's notorious bisexual billionaire.
Yeah, that's right. And the reason why he kept on getting divorced, apparently, was that he suffered from an extremely acute case of premature ejaculation. When they were talking to his first wife, who was a major Hollywood actress in the 1920s, again, it wasn't Zula Pitts. He had
This is a
affairs with all of
child's
them.
show. Eric, what are you doing?
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, children. There's no such thing as childhood anymore, right? So, like, forget it.
You're right. You're so right
the
on
the
that, though.
internet killed all that off forever. So like no one is innocent, right? So of anything ever. Um, it was his first wife, who was another Hollywood actress. It was not Zuzu Pitts, although he had Zuzu Pitts many times. They but the divorce was always a kept a secret, what she filed for and why. And near the end of her life, she gave an interview, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is almost an exact quote. She said, "Oh, well, it was, why we divorced? Well, it was no big deal. I mean, when you look at it, it was just a very small, dribbling little thing."
Good God. So was he a sex symbol in Hollywood himself, or was he just a rich kind of like adventurous billionaire type character that was able to sway in some of these like popular actresses and things of that
Well,
sort?
first of all, you don't sway in popular actresses, okay? I mean, like I said, no one's innocent of anything anymore, and we have to be very, very careful. But everybody knows that Hollywood is a place of, shall we say, sexual transactionalism. And I'll leave it at that. So, so the game is played multiple ways. Okay. Um, but again, I have to be careful about how I frame this because things have changed so much the last couple of years.
I think it's still the same. There's Harvey Weinstein still a big thing.
Yeah, but again, the politics surrounding it has changed a great deal. Like a lot of things that cannot be taken for granted can no longer be taken for granted, and that's definitely a good thing. On the other hand, things also continue and if not in the same form, in another form. But yeah, no, I think the best way to think about it is sexual transactionalism. is the raw core essence of Hollywood. But he was no Leonardo DiCaprio, that's for sure. And of course, Scorsese did this bioepic of Howard Hughes, right? And The Aviator, and it's really more about the Spruce Goose well, not really the fiasco, the Spruce Bruce controversy, about that giant wooden airplane he built to be able to actually transport an entire regiment of tanks across the Pacific in a single flight to back up the invasion of Japan that never happened. But it goes on to sort of like everything: the drug use, the affairs with Katharine Hepburn, and a whole bunch of other people. And the thing about Scorsese, it's actually, I'm not going to say it's a bad movie, but it's not really a good one either. And the thing about Scorsese is he runs, as a director, he runs hot and cold. And he kind of follows the old Howard Hawks rule, which was that you do one for the studio, and when you get your money back, you make one for yourself. And a movie, I mean. And that, I think it's one of the ones he was doing for the studio. It wasn't really Scorsese at its best, but it does a good job packaging in very shiny wrapping paper everything you really need to know about Howard Hughes, especially during the Hollywood period. But yeah, he was, and of course that's where Ellroy got the phrase "fuck pad" from, which appears in the title of my book, which should be out the first quarter of this year. It had to get delayed because of edit proofing processing problems. Or I mean,
Because
just a lot of
That's because you
lot of
put
work to
something
do.
in the title you're not supposed to have.
A lot of, well, that no, no, that's the one thing that isn't problematic. That went down really well. No, it's just that the thing's thing's like going to come in at like 900 pages, so it's taking a lot of work in the proof editing process. So it's running behind schedule. But my understanding is supposed to be the first quarter of this year. It was supposed to be Halloween, but they had to push it back towards like Easter. Um, uh, God, what was I saying?
Back to Howard Hughes. So I want to know from his start. How did he get his start?
From, yeah, well,
Okay.
see, James Ellroy's dad, Armand Ellroy, and there actually was a man with the name Armand Ellroy. It's not made up.
Sounds made up.
Uh,
I mean, my name's
yeah,
Robbie Robertson, so I can't really talk
yeah, well,
trash.
yeah. Oh, yeah, you're not no relation.
I am. That was my uncle.
Robbie Robertson was your uncle?
Yeah,
You mean the musician guy?
the guitar player. Yeah. Is there another one out there? I didn't
Well,
know.
I don't know. I mean, there may be a couple Robbie Robinsons. Oh, say you're his nephew. Well, okay. Well, your estimation in my approval skills has gone up several thousand points. So
I'm kidding. I'm not
that.
related.
No, I didn't think so. Oh, there he goes. Right, straight down again. Yeah,
When I got
I
to
didn't think.
1500 episodes, I was gonna have him on when I was gonna do the 1500 episodes, I was gonna have him on to be like, it would be cool to talk to Robbie Robertson by 1500. And then he died, and I was
Yeah, the
like, damn.
Storyville guy. Yeah. Well, what you can do is you can just channel him and see what comes out.
All right, look.
Get some EVP recording equipment and see what happens.
When people start breaking out candles and lighting stuff, I'm just get out. I can't do it. I can't handle the smells. But all right, how did Howard Hughes get his start? That's what I want to know.
How do you guys? Well, first of all, he was born into wealth because his father was a pioneer in petroleum. He was a bit of a wildcatter, which also Howard continued with, but it was mainly into mining. And his father, in conjunction with a couple other people, some of whom accused ripped them off in full or in part, developed what we call the Hughes tool drill bit, and it was for penetrating deeper sediments of soil when you're actually looking for petroleum. And the thing about the Hughes drill bit is that rather than having a single end on it, it actually has three rotational ones. So when the drill is spinning down, you actually have this three-way mechanism that's actually cutting much more sediment much more quickly. And that was considered a revolutionary development, and he patented it. And that formed the basis of the Hughes Tool Company or Corporation. And it was Hughes Tools, which was a pioneer, and until very recent, I mean, it may still even be going, although I think in a different form, was a cutting edge developer in mineral and mining technologies. And the patent of that was worth, in current terms, billions, literally hundreds and tens of millions at the time in the 1920s and 30s. And that was really the source of Howard's wealth, because that was the only part of his empire that was actually ever really profitable. Everything else more or less lost money, at least over time. And but he kept the entire enterprise flowing from the profits of the Hughes um, uh, tool company. And the reason why that was always a success, even though everything else was kind of a flop by the end of the day, was that that was the one part, the one corporation he controlled that he took no part in administering. He had no part of the management, which meant that the board was able to be successful and not insane in what they were doing. Yeah, so that was really the big start, and then number of complicated marriages and a lot of problems with his parents and his relations, and basically looking for something to do, striking out on his own. The whole mimetic rivalry with the father type of thing, and finally he decided to go into movies, and he simply saw the film industry as a good way of investing surplus cash and becoming his own thing, right? And he went in like with practically like 10-50 million dollars in cash, which was a fortune. Was able to buy any studio he wanted, able to buy any theater chain that he wanted. And he decided to make a movie about aviation and the First World War, which was called Hell's Angels. And I've got it. I've seen it. It's actually definitely worth watching. I mean, it's very bizarre and incredible in a number of ways, but it is definitely worth viewing. And the story about Hell's Angels, and it's typical of everything that happened to Hughes throughout his entire life. It's kind of a pattern that set in, and then all the other events in his life are kind of like synchronous repetitions of the first and original pattern. Is that he finished it in late 1926, and it was just a couple months before Sound came out with the jazz singer, starring Al Jolson, which is also a really good film to watch. And so Howard had a problem, and everyone said, "Well, it's not such a big deal, Howard. You just go ahead and do it." And sound technology is pretty new, and but there's the silent movies at this time. It's only 1927, right? 1927, 1928. They're still they're still bringing them in. We'll transition to sound eventually, but don't worry about it. And and see how we and better luck next time. He said, "No, I'm reshooting the whole thing." He reshot the whole thing with sound.
So are we saying mad genius or what are we saying here?
Well, I mean, it's mad genius or not. I mean, the movie is an amazing technical accomplishment, and he personally directed all the aerial combat scenes. They kept on flying over the San Fernando Valley for hundreds and hundreds of hours, getting all the dogfights right. And actually, several people were actually killed during the filming. Basically, botched landings, or I think there was one midair collision, and at least one person was killed in that. So there were a couple of fatalities linked to the picture, but it was more his grandiosity. I mean, he said the film would have been a success even if it was released as a silent film. I mean, it wouldn't be today probably. I mean, what was that French film about 10 years ago that came out, was totally in silence, a silent film that did really really well. Anyway, you can do it once in 10 years. You can make a lot of money off a silent film or a documentary or something, right? But in those days, still being silent in 1927 wasn't a big deal, but it had to be the cutting edge thing, right? So no matter how much money he burned, it was worth it because he had the cutting edge thing. And it was that kind of grandiosity and narcissism and megalomania, coupled with a kind of a genius, that just propels the Hughes story. And one of the things that makes it such an American story is the excessiveness of it. I mean, American society is puritanical on the surface and hedonistic and neo-pagan underneath, right? And uses a great example of how you transition between the two things. And once he was in a position with enough money, enough power, he just burned everything up or down, depending how you look at it. And gargantuan appetites, unlimited and unbridled passions, basically had sex with just about everything that moved, and took about every single drug conceivable. I mean, he outdid Jack Nicholson by light years.
Damn, I was gonna say that too. I was gonna literally say Jack Nicholson.
No, 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 no. Jack was emulating Howard then.
I'll say Jack Nicholson has probably done every drug and done everybody.
Probably has, but Howard got there first, and probably maybe a little bit classier, maybe not as much fun, but maybe with a bit more class. Don't know. Don't really want to go there.
Well, how much of Howard Hughes is myth? Like, what have you been able to find that you just don't believe about Howard Hughes, whether it's a crazy, insane story. I've heard that he drank like, what was it, codeine or something, and he never cut his fingernails.
Near the end, I mean, some of that stuff, it's a gradual deterioration, and what you tend to do when you talk about Howard Hughes is you tend to compress them into things. Okay, I see where you're getting at. I thought one thing that was a myth that apparently is not was that at one point he was going to build an airplane with a nuclear reactor in the tail section to power it, so it could fly in the air perpetually. And apparently, he actually did have plans for such an airplane, and they weren't that far from developing it.
So kind of like Tesla with his death ray that he had.
Yeah, yes, and if you the Netflix series Agent Elvis, it's got a
Hey,
Howard Hughes episode in it, and they're actually on board the nuclear reactor airplane.
isn't that a cartoon?
Yeah, it's animated.
Okay.
Matthew McConaughey.
You
Yeah.
said like the show like it was an actual like thing. I was like, it's an
Well, it is
animated
an
like
actual
Family
show. It's
Guy
just an
thing.
anime. I mean, look, if you grow up like me watching anime and manga and all that, and reading manga and all that stuff, the animated stuff is as real and probably more often more real than the so-called non-animation stuff, which
'Cause
is
you can
like
get
the
away
organic,
with shit.
fleshy stuff. Yeah.
You-
Oh no,
yeah.
it's way better. So that I thought was a myth. Something about him though. So you're asking me.
I'm trying to decipher who this person is. I'm trying to understand if there's more that's been media manipulated to create this figure that has kind of made that to me, it seems like a real life Hugh Hefner, but in a sense of like involved in way more, like a mix of Elvis and Hugh Hefner. But I want to know how much of it was real and how much of it was fake media. You know, I feel like, especially if you own Hollywood, you can really do whatever you want to manipulate your own image, to make you come out however you want in the cultural memory.
Yeah, in the Porter book, you have to read it with a grain of salt because he throws in every single item of gossip conceivable, which is why it comes to like almost 1,000 pages. I mean, it's a great read for 1,000 pages because you're reading stuff you couldn't possibly believe, like just how much of a cross-dresser Spencer Tracy actually was, and stuff like that. So you're never able to look at guys like Cagney or Bogey or Tracy or any of those guys ever again, and no one seems to be straight. And like the three most well endowed actors in Hollywood in the 30s and 40s was appropriately enough. The first one, Johnny Weissmuller, the megastar Tarzan, John Ireland, who apparently was humongous, and the third guy. I will remember his name, something Tuck. Anyway, he did a lot of westerns. He played guy in a lot of westerns, and they would have like competitions, and they'd have like everyone in Hollywood would get together at somebody's mansion in the dark, and Weissmuller or John Arnold would come out, and they'd have the spotlight, and they have the orchestra playing like sultry Caribbean music, and then
Gosh.
they'd sort of like reveal themselves, and everyone would go ooh ah, and you understand like the whole thing about Tarzan and Jane in the Jungle, how it actually works, that sort of thing. So yeah, so there's tons and tons and tons of that in the Porter book. So you're reading it, and it's like, and I was only taking legal substances while I was reading it, and I said to myself, I said, okay, what point does reality switch off and phantasmagoria begin? And you realize that there really is no hard line division between the two things. But the thing about Howard is what makes him such a big deal, what makes him such an archetype. I would say that he's the epitome, and that's one thing I make a great deal of in my Ellroy book, talking about him, is that he's sort of the epitome of the dynamics of parapolitics, which is that there's nothing really that institutionalized about it. It's very decentered, it's very diffuse, it's very affective, um, but it's about links, it's about networks, it's about people knowing each other, who know others, who all want to sort of do the same thing, which is either illegal, legal, or paralegal, quasi legal. And that's how people simply facilitate each other. It's about being middlemen, it's about mediating between others and among others. And that's what Howard does. I mean, he's sort of like just the guy to go to. He's the go-to guy if you're doing a lot of stuff in Hollywood. And then, of course, during the Second World War, he becomes a war asset because of the Hughes company and Hughes Aircraft, which developed some of the very earliest helicopters, some of which were actually employed in combat. and designs for a number of very advanced fighters, some of which went in production, some of which never did. And then that establishes through the Pentagon his connection to both the Defense Department more generally, the defense industry more generally, and then, of course, the CIA and national security and intelligence agencies.
How deep do you believe that he actually was? Like we talk about government contracting on things, he was involved in a little bit more, it seems like, than just building a couple airplanes or building an idea for an airplane. I think he tried to rescue a submarine at some point, try to get
Oh yeah,
some
that was
sort
in the
of.
1970s. That was an attempt to raise a Soviet submarine that sank, I think, in the Southern Pacific, off the Philippines, I think, but in one of the major trenches of the South.
See, normal
Um,
people don't do that. They just don't.
Well, no, they don't normally do it. But the more important thing about the Gomar expedition is that it really did seem to be a cover story, because the cover story they had is that they got hold of it with the winches. They were bringing it up with the cables, and the cables cut, and they lost it. In fact, we think that they actually retrieved it, and they claimed after the fact that it was a failure to prevent the Russians from knowing that they actually retrieved the information and data and equipment that they wanted. So yeah, no, that was a huge deal, but it was probably successful, not unsuccessful.
But so how deep do you think that his government connections go?
I think fairly deep. And the other thing too is that like a lot of other New York or East Coast billionaires, he gave money to everybody. So, to the Kennedys and to Nixon. So he was playing both ends against the middle. So that when you're dealing with that level of financial magnitude, you're able to spread your cash around so that you'll always win in the end somehow, because nobody is not working for you. Or more to the point, it's not so much working. You see, when you talk about conspiracy theory and secret governments, we always tend to imagine it as like a bureaucracy of a kind, like a command and control system. And it's not that way. It doesn't function that way at all. It functions through influence. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just criminal stuff, criminogenic stuff, right? Like bribery and graft and corruption and blackmail and extortion and all this stuff that happens normally between people. Only this time it's actually governments or people representing governmental agencies who are doing it, right? That's the key difference. And Howard was simply able to have almost virtually every single major politician in the United States federal government from the 30s onwards owing him something in his debt. Hoover did through information, Hughes did it through finances, but then there's a link between Hoover and Hughes that, of course, Ellroy makes a great deal of. I mean, more than there actually was, because among the other things that Hughes had was he owned the magazine Confidential. And Confidential was the real gossip sex expose magazine of Hollywood in the 1940s and 50s, 30s, 40s, and early 50s, right? He owned that. And there was so much dirt. And again, you're asking me how much of it's true, how much is false. Don't know. What matters is it gets into print. And as soon as it becomes into print, the story, whether it possesses any objective truth or not, acquires a subjective truth value, which is that this is what everyone's going to be thinking about. The next time they look at Ava Gardner, you're going to think about her having sex with Sammy Davis Jr., right? Whether it's true or not, probably isn't, but that was the story, kind of made sense, and it was great copy because every single housewife in America was thinking about, well, if Ava Gardner could get Sammy Davis Jr., I might be able to do as well, because he just kind of goes that way, right? So it doesn't really matter what's true or false. And apparently there are rumors, talking about myths and stuff, right? There are rumors that Hughes fed Hoover a lot of stuff through the back channels of Confidential magazine and some of the stuff they didn't publish. And that a lot of that stuff, material, if the story is true, went into the FBI files, the secret files, the X files that Hoover had.
No, I've seen the files on Hughes. There's a good portion if you're able to go to like this site called Document Cloud. You can search up key terms and they'll find like they have every government document you could possibly think of, at least that I've seen. They use it for the JFK stuff, but I saw an art document that was a letter from Hoover, and he was talking about Howard Hughes, and he mentioned that Howard Hughes has a very significant influence into lots of cultural sectors. And he was mentioning that this is someone that we need to keep tabs on. This is someone that needs to be watched. I was thinking at the time it was because of that probably around this period, you're talking about the Hollywood blacklist and just probably influence into Hollywood. So I would figure that if he's starting to be involved in the Hollywood business, then you would just try and keep tabs on him. But I think he was more concerned about what else was he intertwined with, whether it was mafia connections or whether it was government connections.
Well, I mean, none of this stuff are mutually exclusive. You can be concerned about him because of the McCarthy issue and his ideological conformity, but you can also be interested in him as an intelligence asset that you want to cultivate. You want to enter into a symbiotic partnership with. And of course, one of the guys that Hughes had working for, or Confidential magazine had working for them, so therefore the guy was really working for Hughes, is a guy who shows up a lot. He's like one of James Ellroy's greatest heroes, real life heroes. And he appears in a couple of short stories, and he appears as a camouflage character as Pete Bondurant or Bondurant in the USA Underworld trilogy. Is a guy called Freddie Otash, or Fred Otash. And Fred Otash was 6'2", 240 pounds. He was about my size. Lebanese, heavy chain smoker, heavy womanizer. He had 3 girlfriends all at the same time, and they were all major Hollywood starlets. One of whom I think was Anita Ekberg. So he was sharing Anita Ekberg with, I think, I don't know, maybe, I don't really want to libel anybody alive or dead, but he was doing a number of Hollywood personalities simultaneously. And he was a psychopathic, violent ex-cop. Used to work for the LAPD, and he was on the special, and remember the Zoot Suit riots? He was part of the anti-Zoot Suit squad, and he specialized in basically torturing and beating severely Hispanic Latino prisoners. Because he was on the Latino beat of the LAPD, and he was so corrupt and so violent, and he was also blackmailing his captain, that they finally kicked him off the force, which takes a lot to get kicked out of the LAPD for excessive behavior. And he became a private investigator, and sort of became the point man for Confidential magazine's clandestine activities in Hollywood, the Hollywood scene. And he helped engineer and develop a lot of these little electronic recording doodads, like the pen with a microphone in it, or the cigarette box that's got a little tape recorder in it. That sort of stuff. Well, Otash's crew and the Confidential, shall we say, business enterprise, did a lot of the pioneering work in that kind of like domestic do-it-yourself espionage. The espionage at home
The
kit.
DIY kit.
Yeah, you buy it for your kid, and then they go wind recording up what their parents are doing in the bedroom. So
All this evolved from a little Annie decoder pin.
mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. So, and of course, if Otash is grabbing all this stuff, then Hoover will want to know it, right? And the best way of getting it, the most cost-efficient way and the safest way of getting it, is not to strong arm use. You do the soft tap on the shoulder. You want to team up, and we can do favors for each other. And of course, Hoover would say, of course, Hughes would say yes.
What do you think, like when it comes to Nixon, was he aware that Howard Hughes had donated his money through his brother's camp or his brother's restaurant?
Almost certainly.
Almost certainly.
That's one of the theories about the Watergate break-in, that no one has really been able to explain very well, including the burglars themselves, what they were doing there in that room on that night. And one of the theories that's been put forward is that they were there because they thought that the publisher of the Las Vegas Sun newspaper, Hal Greenspan, had actually gotten the papers about the Hughes' loan to Don Nixon. And he was either in Greenspan's office in Las Vegas, or it was in the Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate hotel, and that's what they were looking for.
Do you think that Hughes ever got criticism from anybody about, I mean, throughout his career, have you been able to find anything about criticisms of Hughes, whether it's just his eccentricness or the way he was a billionaire, or has he just been remembered as this figure of eccentric value?
I mean, it's really sort of his value as a cultural signifier. That's, if I can put it that way, is with us today. At the time, though, I think one thing he attracted a great deal of criticism for was his involvement in Nevada politics, because his buyout of Las Vegas, he bought up a number of the major hotels in the Strip, and especially remember, Glitter Gulch, the older part of the Strip, like things like the Frontier or the Golden Nugget, the Silver Slipper. I think he owned
I
the
know
Mint
those.
at
Yeah.
one point. I think he owned the Mint, which unfortunately he's gone. Some of those places, I mean, they're corrupt as hell, but I mean, they were really beautiful monuments to Art Deco and the whole Las Vegas aesthetic, which is really, I mean, it's dumb, but it's seductive at the same time. So he was a major player in Las Vegas for a number of years, and he became very involved in Nevada politics. And of course, he bought both the state senators, including Paul Laxalt, was on his payroll forever. Um, but he had a lot of he actually, even though he was very closely tied to the Pentagon, he actually was an early environmental activist, and that he really spearheaded the movement of the anti-nuke movement in the United States, in the American Western states anyway, because he wanted to stop atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons, much of which was taking place in Nevada. That's how John Wayne and everyone who worked on this set, the one very famous Western, which again, name eludes me, I will think of it soon. They all contracted cancer 10, 20 years later. And they all think they got it because they were actually downwind from a nuclear test blast that took place about while they were actually out filming. But the reason, of course, that Howard wanted the nuclear test stopped was that he was living in Las Vegas at the time. And he had become mega paranoid about infections and disease and transmission of toxic substances. So he was really prepared to kind of like undermine U.S. national security just to prevent himself from being exposed to a major health hazard. Um,
Why did the germaphobe I or kind of addiction, whatever he had about the disorder that he had about germs? What? Because I mean, if he's like known as like a whatever, I don't know what you would call him, but promiscuous, would why would he be so afraid of germs then? I'm like, that's kind of like one of the biggest
well, first of
things.
all, with the promiscuousness, we don't know how far it went. I mean, when you read some of this stuff, and not just the Porter book, but other things as well, more or less respectable publications, he's with the women and sometimes the boys and the men. Um, Apparently, he had a serious. Oh no, wait, no, sorry, I take it back. Porter suggests that Frank Sinatra had a lifelong love affair with Burt Lancaster, and Milton Berle was sometimes part of it, maybe like a triangle or something.
What
Okay,
books are you
so
reading there, Eric?
another book by Porter, which is the Frank Sinatra book. Okay, so because like you said, okay, what I said to myself, I set myself a challenge. I said, okay, I've got like 900 pages of Bacchanalia, right? Hollywood Bacchanalia. Who's the one guy in Hollywood I could think of who might be able to compete with Hughes on this front? And I thought about Jack Nicholson. I said, no, that's too boring and predictable. And I said, I knew it, Frank Sinatra, right? And guess what? Porter's got a 600-page book on Frank Sinatra. But Burt Lancaster and him, they were close, man. They were tight. And Milton Berle was part of it. But I'm off target because I was talking about Howard Hughes, not Frank Sinatra. But oh yes, Howard Hughes had an affair with Cary Grant, whom apparently he was very, very. Cary Grant apparently was the great male love of his life, and it is, I think, a fact because I have come across this in several other places that when Cary Grant died, someone delivered a bouquet of beautiful, top-notch red roses to the funeral, and all it had written on it was "To Cary from Howard."
Makes it more believable.
Yeah. Oh, or wait a second. Correct myself. You may have to edit this out. I may have it backwards. It was actually Hughes died first, and Cary Grant was still alive. And to Hughes's funeral, anyway, some Grant sent Hughes flowers. I think I got it backwards. My bad.
Okay.
But certainly they were very, very close. Yeah. So how did I get on this?
I don't know. I'm trying to get to the point of how we get to Howard Hughes and we get to this. Like I said, we were talking about how bad, if anybody talked bad about Howard Hughes or if he had any scandals at the
Oh
time.
yeah,
And
right, sure, right. Yeah, Nevada. It's because of his involvement with buying Las Vegas. Of course, you see. Well, let's face it. I mean, 75% of Nevada is Las Vegas, right? And Reno's 5%. There's 20% is everything else. And you
desert.
and if you're the dominant power if you're the hegemon of Las Vegas, you're going to have a huge controlling influence on the state. And a lot of people did not like the way that he became involved in local politics. And he wanted to rezone Las Vegas. He wanted to build all these casino hotels including the International, which was a hideous flop by the end. Thank God they tore it down because it really was decrepit and nasty. Um, and zoning law changes, and of course, here's the other thing too: his greatest critics, believe it or not, were the mafia, because in order to acquire the casinos, or not so much the hotels, but the casinos, because the mafia had the skim running in a lot of the Vegas casinos, because it was sort of the
Well, the old school mafia ones, right? Like the
yeah, but
Cohen
we're
and all.
talking about the 1950s and 60s. Okay,
Yeah.
so no, how Las Vegas Day has been pretty much demafiaized. It's more like financial crime rather than the old school stuff, right? Like the stuff like in Casino, which is a good Scorsese film about the mafia in Las Vegas. Um, and so he had to do a deal with the mafia to acquire control over the casinos, both above board and below board. And his contact man was Robert Mayhew, who was worked at times for both the FBI and the CIA, and he was also his contact with the Mormons, the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City. So Mahu, who knew a lot of the mafia guys and has been fingered as a suspect in a possible mafia organized hit of JFK in Dallas in November 22nd, 1963, was Howard's go-between, his mediator between Howard and the mafia. And the mafia couldn't believe that they were charging Hughes top dollar, and they were still skimming him anyway. And they were chuckling about this to themselves forever, as how they were ripping off the so-called financial genius. And they were skimming him, and they did charge him too much for the casinos. But I think at the end of the day, the joke's really on them, because when we look at the big picture, said why did Hughes buying into Las Vegas? It was such a gusto, like this Bacchanalian, Satyriconian sort of overdrive, Dionysian exuberance and excess. It was because it was a tax dodge. He was able, he would buy, because the tax rates in Las Vegas were so low, and through some very, very creative accounting, which is why it took his estate forever to actually get sorted out. And I still believe there are still, to this day, there are outstanding issues on his estate, who gets what and how much and why, that he was able to save tens and tens of millions of dollars. So although he was definitely paying an overhead, in the long term, it really was profitable for the entirety of the Hughes Corporation to engage in the Las Vegas deal. Yeah,
But
but the main local resistance to him was the fact that he was treating Las Vegas as his fief, and he was simply wanting to make too many changes. He also was promising forever to build this model community. It's kind of like, his version of Epcot, and it would have been for all the workers in the space and aviation industry, space and aeronautics industry, that was supposed to have this huge boom in Nevada. It's like Area 51 stuff, right? But only above board. And it never really materialized, and they argued over it for years, literally. And again, it was the same thing. It's a huge tax dodge. He bought up the land and was therefore able to write off an enormous amount of federal tax on the grounds that he was actually developing a project that was of a significant economic value for the state of Nevada.
how did he get a
So
hold of some of these
I'm sorry. So a
casinos?
lot of it really seems to be financial and tax manipulation and evasion.
How did he get a hold of the casinos from the older gangsters, though?
That was Mayhew stuff, and a lot of that's been done under board, and we'll never know very much about it. But he had to pay out a fair amount of cash to make it. Well, it wasn't so much acquiring them. He could acquire the hotel legally, right? You buy the hotel, and the casino comes with it normally, unless there's a kind of a contractual or property arrangement. The problem is getting the mafia to leave it alone, right? And that's really where the payoffs came. It was a friendly extortion racket. I know you guys own it. I mean run it. I want to own it. I'll give you more than will ever appear on paper in exchange for you guys basically not screwing around with me too much. And that basically seemed to be the way that it worked. Although they kept on screwing around with him. But then again, I still think at the end of the day he made much more. And
Why do you think
that was simply a business cost.
why do you think Hughes towards the end of his life became more of a recluse and kind of nobody could snap a photo of him? He just seemed like he vanished out of the whole thing.
Well, there's a psychoanalytical explanation, and if you read anything by Hughes, like the Empire book, for example, which is very, very good and a bit more reliable than the Porter book, but the Porter book covers this as well. And God of Speed covers it as the Australian novel by Luke Davis, does it very well. Um, there are two ways to read it. I mean, read it that he was suffering from some sort of psychological difficulties that may have involved sexual abuse or child abuse when he was very young. Um, there are different types of mental pathologies that do get centered upon contamination, purity of body, purity of blood, purity of urine, purity of, as they put in Dr. Strangelove, vital bodily fluids and essences. Um, but the other thing, of course, is that he actually had died. There is a theory that his existence was being simulated. And the cover story was that he just become a recluse because he more or less rented the top 2 floors of the Desert Inn Hotel, which is really one of the nicest old-fashioned style Las Vegas hotels, the Desert Inn. And he had the 2 top floors, and he blacked out all the windows. They put industrial tape over all of them, and he just lived in the darkness the whole time.
It's so
And at
fucking
some point,
weird.
during this period, which would have been the late 60s into early 70s, he died. And the Mormons didn't want to shut down the operation because it was a sugar daddy for too many people, including the Church of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City. So they said that he flew down to, I think it was the Bahamas, is where he then moved for a while, where he was also in a total reclusive state, and he would only talk to people over the telephone. And then what happened was that there was that famous fake biography of Howard Hughes. And then he sort of went on television to denounce the fake biography, but he never appeared on TV. They put on the TV camera and was pointing at this microphone with a two-way speaker system. And it was Howard Hughes' voice coming out, giving all the reasons why the biography was not to be trusted, right? I think it was the Irving biography, right? So he blew all that down, but he never actually appeared. Several people claim to have gone in and interviewed him, like including, I think, the governor of at least one state. I don't know if it was Nevada or another one, but they saw him, but they saw someone like him acting and speaking like him.
What would
But
be the benefit of keeping his image
it's
alive?
actually very, very difficult to actually verify his physical existence much after 1970.
What would be the benefit of keeping his image alive?
Image alive is that if he's simply a recluse, then you've got the perfect explanation as to why you never see him.
I meant no, but what would be the purpose of trying to use his image?
I'm not quite sure I understand.
Well, if you're saying that there's a theory that he died, what would be the purpose of trying to keep him alive if you do believe that he was dead?
Because they did not want, because the will were multiple wills. He changed them every 72 hours for years. There was too much chaos as to who would actually receive a portion. But since the Mormons and Mahu's outfit had operational control over him, psychological and physical, and especially absolute if he was dead, then there was absolutely every reason in the world to keep things going because they were making a huge bundle off. They may not have been getting an inheritance, but they were scamming the company hideously through overbilling and all kinds of like fake expenses and all kinds of like benefits like yachts, planes, cars, buying everything on Howard's check.
Do you believe there's more about Howard Hughes than we know?
Well, there's always something more to everyone whom we know.
That's true, but I mean, do you think that there's something a little bit deeper? I mean, it is a little bit strange. I mean, if you work for the government, you contract for the government, making military crafts or whatever you're doing, I'd have to think that you have a pre-existing relationship or you're developing a relationship where it goes a little bit farther. I mean, owning fronts for where the government, CIA, intelligence agency can do tactics. I'm trying to get to the point of when finding out that the theater that Oswald was arrested at was owned by Howard Hughes. And that can be a coincidence. I believe that 100%. But also, like, even look at Spawn Ranch, where Manson eventually ended up. That was Howard Hughes was there as well too. So he had a movie production thing that went on there as well too. Not that could just be a famous movie location set. I'll agree with that as well too. But
well, it was, yeah.
When you see his name pop up in a couple various very kind of strange occurrences, like even Elvis's name didn't pop up that fucking much.
Well, I mean, like the Spawn Ranch, for example. I mean, or the Texas movie theater. I mean, Dallas. I mean, I personally don't really put a lot in that because he owned a lot of properties in the movie industry in Hollywood, in Southern California, out into the Valley and the Imperial Desert, in the Imperial Valley. So that if the Manson family's hiding out in an old movie set, there'd be a very good chance that it would be owned in part or in whole by Howard Hughes, or was owned at some point. Just like the movie theater in Dallas was a prominent movie theater, and if Oswald went in there to meet somebody, which has never really been proven, but if he did, that would have been a logical place to meet. I can't really see by itself that much substantial in it, and it's like we were talking about before. When you talk about anything parapolitical or anything involved with conspiracy theory, that's worth something as opposed to all the junk that's produced. You have to come up with face the problem of what we call uh, hearsay or indirect evidence. You can't, uh, and the problem is with evidence, and especially hearsay or circumstantial evidence, even better. Hearsay is part of it, but circumstantial evidence is really what the core issue is. Is that when you start accumulating lots and lots and lots of circumstantial events, the killer knew the victim. The killer lived 100 yards from the victim. The killer and the victim took the same bus to work every single day. The killer would go on a walk, and the killer would always, a part of his walk every evening, without fail, at 8 p.m., would go by the victim's house. Okay, so the guys have been accused of murdering the victim. He does all these things, and all of these things I've told you are circumstantial. It's not enough to convict. But when you get 20 or 30 of them, and you don't really have an outstanding alternative candidate for the crime, it starts becoming persuasive. And it starts becoming persuasive because it's the problem of counter explanation or counterfactual explanation. In other words, how many things do you have to explain away or provide an alternative explanation for to sort of demystify or take out of the fact any kind of potential evidence for conspiratorial or criminal action? And if you've got too many things that you have to deconstruct, I'm using that in the absolute most base sense of the word deconstruct. If there are too many things you have to deconstruct, then at some point you're going to start losing, because it starts becoming highly improbable that that all of these things can be dealt with. And if all of these things cannot be dealt with, then you may have enough to arrive at least a reasonable conclusion on the balance of probabilities, if not necessarily beyond a reasonable doubt, that there is something worth looking at here, right? And so much of conspiracy theory and parapolitical writing and analysis deals with what we call circumstantial evidence, because most of what goes on in the parapolitical universe, or phenomena that we can classify as criminogenic and or parapolitical, are not written. Much of what we would call parapolitical and or criminogenic phenomena are things that don't leave traces. And therefore, if you're going to reconstruct a parapolitical or criminogenic sequence of events, very often what you have to do, because you have nothing else to work with, is evidence that meet the definition of either hearsay and or circumstantial. And the trick, therefore, is to accumulate as much as you can that's reliable, that's verifiable. Like, Howard owned these properties, Howard invested in these businesses, Howard had all these girlfriends who were the girlfriends of guys in the mafia who all knew each other. And you do this 20, 30, 40 times, and then you might have something that's actually persuasive.
But then Howard Hughes owned a bunch of movie theaters and had a big influence into Hollywood, but also worked for the government at a point. We know that the FBI had certain tactics where they'd sit in theaters. It's how they got John Dillinger. CIA had tactics of
Maybe,
using.
by the way, that's sort of debated
Don't.
too. But
What are
anyway.
you talking about? John Dillinger's debated. The guy killed him, and then the one person that killed him made up this story about wiping the blood or something of that on some. And then Hoover fires that guy and makes his life fucking miserable, and so the guy commits suicide and kills himself.
Right. But open and shut.
But how is that? Why'd you say maybe? You started shrugging your shoulders like John
I'm simply
Dillinger's
saying
alive.
is that I don't think it's never there are definitely question marks about how Dillinger got it at the end. Basically, if Hoover lost him, that would have been the end of his career. So they had to execute somebody and then say it was him after the fact.
God damn.
That's what I mean about, in other words, you can see in the Dillinger scenario enough of a motive for Hoover to have attempted something like that. It may have been Dillinger, okay? But
It
I'm
is
merely
Dillinger.
saying is that if it wasn't if they had lost Dillinger, then they really would have had to find a replacement.
It's I want to ask you about why is there such an obsession with politics about getting famous people like surrounded by you or something like Elvis Presley with Nixon or anything like that, or you talk about Joe Kennedy, not Joe Kennedy, JFK with Frank Sinatra. You could talk about any super massive, even the stuff that goes on now with the Epstein stuff, whether they're highly influenced or they just have a lot of power, but there's these weird associations with political figures and some kind of either deep-seated names or just influential names, like they have to be around famous people or something.
Much of it has to do, apart from publicity,
Vanity?
obviously, and vanity, ego. Much of it has to do with sex and sexual politics. And something I learned from Peter Dale Scott, and again, this gets us back to circumstantial evidence and hearsay, but there is a ton of it, uh, is that the great unwritten history of politics and parapolitics in Washington, D.C. is that the entire city is crisscrossed by a series of sexual blackmail rings. And there is almost no doubt in my mind, and I'm a total agnostic as to whether or not it was murder or suicide in his jail cell. Epstein was running a sexual blackmail operation with minors, which was like the worst type of sexual blackmail operation, because if you are caught with a pedophile, then you're caught as a pedophile with an underage partner, then you are doubly dead, and you will do anything to avoid a criminal charge on those grounds. Because you, for one thing, you're probably not going to survive prison, just like Epstein didn't.
Do you think Epstein was just this figure that was doing some bad stuff, or do you think he was CIA or what they're saying about him?
The operation, as far as we know it, and I only really know what's in the public domain, is that he seemed to have had extensive financial files and inroads into an awful lot of corporations, trusts, funds, and private assets and holdings. It was an amazingly complex operation.
Do you think that's kind of the sway that some of these politicians, because a lot of these politicians are people too, Nixon and all them are people too. They, I mean,
Oh,
we know
Nixon!
about.
I say one thing about Nixon. Nixon's the one guy who probably slipped through the sexual blackmail network because how
Nobody fucked him.
well I somebody did, but I don't think that he was really motivated in that way. Have you ever read he's sort of like studies six crises. He's six crises. I always have problems saying that word. Well, anyway, what he describes solving a crisis kind of like ejaculating. I mean, he makes it sound like a sexual exercise, like heat and sweat and passion and determination and intent and intensity and effort and try again and try again and try again. It's like, yeah, I know what you're describing. And what you've done is you've turned it into a political allegory for your sexual fantasies, Dick. I mean, that's what you've done. So yeah, but he got his rocks off that way, being politically savvy. Uh, Kennedy's, of course. I mean, the Kennedys are completely different, right? That's one of the great things about American history is the complete antithesis of those two guys. Because Kennedy, of course, the presidency was a joke. I mean, it's just something his dad bought him. The real important thing was getting his hands on Marilyn Monroe. That's what really mattered, and that's where Frank Sinatra came in. I mean, yeah, Sinatra campaigned for him, Martin campaigned for him. Dean Martin couldn't stand the SOB JFK. But and then and of course Sammy Davis Jr. and of course the really 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 big gun in the whole thing, of course, is Joey Bishop. That's a joke. Sorry. Okay. So anyway, and the Rat Pack and all that stuff. It was basically a front for orgies.
Where can I ask where you would get that evidence from, just besides those associations?
Uh every decent biography of Frank Sinatra will have, and also the best book ever written about the Rat Pack and this aspect of American popular culture and history, of course, is Dino by Nick Tosches. And if you're going to read one book that's political in a popular cultural sense, read that book because he does a great job running down the Rat Pack.
Is this how politics have always ran though? Like this has just been so it's like
You read Thucydides, not Herodotus so much, but Herodotus was a mythologist. But you read Thucydides and you read Xenophon between the lines, and then you get in the Roman historians like Suetonius and Tacitus, and some of the later ones of like Manius Marcellus. All they're doing is talking about sexual degeneration as a symptom of psychic decay and social decomposition.
have you learned more from doing your parapolitical research, more about how things actually run? I mean, it's not easily explainable to people that are still in the public realm of things.
I really think what parapolitics is at the end of the day,
I believe in
it,
some of it. I just don't
oh yeah,
know
sure.
about
No,
how
no,
far
no,
it
no. But I mean, if
goes.
we're talking about it more or less as a field, I mean, it's not really a field. It's like again, it's like a bunch of guys who sort of think approximately the same way,
Cryptozoology.
working on approximately the same sort of stuff, like a mythology.
But you're basing it off human intentions of that, not just a political position can get you isolated away from the downfalls of political humanity, which is the fact of scandals, vanity, greed, sex, lust, all these things that come out in a person are eventually going to boil out into one of these uptight like, do you hear all this shit about the Hunter Biden stuff? Everyone's like, how dare you make fun of an addict? And Biden should stand by his son. I'm like, he had a gun to a stripper's head while he was snorting cocaine. I was like, that's doesn't matter if he's an addict or not. That's nuts. Don't fucking do that.
I think that
It's just
the
like,
less I'll let you know that's your rant. I'll let that stand. I think that the lesson of parapol, what it's really all about, is trying to come up with a way, either empirical, like mapping, like Peter Dale Scott does very well most of the time, or theory, which I do a little bit more of, and guys like Robert Cribb or Olanda Tunander do more of, is it's about the role of networks in political decision making, and especially the way that political decision making overlaps with national intelligence operations and or organized crime. That is really what it's about. And therefore, the thing about the parapolitical, which is why you kind of like biographies and you sort of like inside exposés that Suetonius keeps on promising us. You know, you read the 12 Caesars to find out just what everybody was doing in their bedroom more than anything else, right? I mean, Caligula and Nero. I mean, who can resist that, right? So that's what you really want to find out about. And what it teaches you is how much these personal connections double as political connections. I mean, how many rulers, tyrants, dictators, or even just absolute monarchs like Louis XIV, how many of them ruled through their mistresses and were ruled by their mistresses?
it's a good point. It's an old mafia tactic. I forgot who the Don was that used to do it, but he used to have his wife greet people when they would come up to the door because his wife had this ability to just be able to be like, come on, oh, hey, come inside. Let me cook you some dinner. Or let me cook you this. And the next thing you know, by the time they got to him, it doesn't matter if there was a huge conflict going on. They'd be all kind of unangered. They'd be
Yeah,
ready to have a
they'd
discussion.
be mollified and appeased. Yeah, absolutely. Those are the things you kind of have to understand. I mean, they're not long-term structural stuff, right? I mean, it's not like, something like, say, the Council of Foreign Relations as the regulatory body, or at least the point of interface among the regulators of the Anglo-American post-empire sort of thing, that's long-term stuff. But you have to you see every time you break down an historical event or phenomena, you have to separate between the short-term, immediate, and then the long-term structural, right? And a completely comprehensive approach has to be inclusive. It has to involve both elements. I mean, Hitler apparently was provocating until the very last minute about whether to invade Russia or not. And I think basically guys like Goebbels and Himmler who really wanted to do it just did a better job massaging his ego the night before or the day before.
How much
and tilted it that way.
How much do you think about when we talk about like major figures in history? We can talk about like in the beginning we mentioned about Howard Hughes, how much of it was media inflation compared to how much it was his actual character, but how much in horrible atrocities that have been done, figures that we remember like Adolf Hitler, how much do you think was manipulated into him by an outside force or an opposing force? We can use this example on a simpler one too, Jim Jones. I mean, when I was doing a clip with you about Jim Jones, you mentioned that he did a lot of good things. The People's Temple did.
Oh yeah, well, the
Um,
People's Temple was a grassroots social justice movement in San Francisco. So it's not like he doesn't do that. The thing is that the temple doubles or triples as other things at the same time. It's like dual purpose or dual function. And that's also one of the ways people get confused, because if you attack the temple, then you're being a reactionary. And if you defend the temple, then you're being a dupe. And both may be correct, because you're dealing with the same thing on two different levels: the political and the parapolitical, the licit and the illicit, the legal and the illegal. It again, these are not, we're so too binary or dualistic in our logic. These things are not mute. These are very few things are necessarily mutually exclusive. Certain things may not be proven, right? We something may be dual function and we don't really know it, or we can't say with certainty because the evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, is simply not there. But any complex operation of any kind can become a dual function thing. It's just the nature of the beast, and the nature of the beast is that the public realm is not the entirety of the political realm. Once you disassociate the two, that the public realm is not exhaustive of the political realm, then you have a non-public political realm. And a non-public political realm, what's the difference between a non, which is an awkward word, non-clumsy word, non-public political realm with a private political realm? And if you've got a private political realm, what can you exclude from that? What do you know in advance cannot happen? That couldn't happen. Not possible. A priori reasoning, axiomatic approaches, right? Oh, that can't happen. How do you know? If it's private.
no, I agree with that a lot. It's just I don't know how far that goes, which is the thing, because then you leave the wall open for any type of skepticism about anything from sexual scandals to Bohemian Grove to
Right. And I think the only, and that's right. And that's one of the downsides. That's one of the methodological or philosophical, I'd not say philosophical, intellectual risks of it. And then you just got to sort it out for yourself on a case by case basis. I mean, there's no answer. But it really is in some ways, it's hyper empirical. You just got to do it one at a time,
so
one scandal at a time, one crime at a time.
how do you ever get reasoning and agreement across all boards, even with people that are still in the public realm? If you want to talk about certain things, like even Bohemian Grove, I had an academic on here talk about it, but he was very even keel about it. Never really got into the super what some people who might dive a little bit deeper into it would talk about. I just asked him, I was like, "Don't you think it's weird that a bunch of people are sitting in front of an owl statue having like lunch and dinner?" He's like, "Yeah, but they're just talking about policy." I was like, I don't give a shit what you're talking about, but you could do that at a hotel or a four-star motel or something like that. You don't need to be doing it in front of an owl statue. He's like, "But what's weird about that?"
I I'll put it this way, and kind of cut to the chase, I guess, as my summing up. Uh, do you know the phrase arcane imperi?
No.
It's Latin, and basically well, if there's a literal translation which sounds dumb, which is basically the empire of the arcane or the arcane empire. But what it really means is secret knowledge necessary for governance. Not so much government, which is the public, but governance, which is the private politician's exercise of personal power, right? Within the system of government. And arcane imperi goes all the way back. There's some debate as to who actually formulated. Dante mentions it. Marsilius of Padua mentions it. You could see it in Cicero. You could see it in Seneca, right back to the early imperial Romans or the late Republican Romans, and even Thucydides and Pericles suggested. And arcane imperi is this, well, the notion or the theory of arcane imperi, which was like a huge deal in the Renaissance, the English Renaissance, Shakespeare. Some of Shakespeare's history plays or Roman plays seem to be about the subject of arcane imperi, right? Is that there's this like playbook. There's this textbook, literal or metaphor out there, like Machiavelli was trying to like imitate when he wrote The Prince, right? About how to govern. And philosophers of politics like Carl Schmitt or Eric Vogelin very seriously, Heidegger too somewhat, and I think persuasively argued that there is, at least within Western European cultures like the Italian, the Spanish, the French, the Vatican, the papacy, the English aristocracy, the Elizabethan nobility, there is an agreed upon but off the books notion of rules and regulations and rites and rituals and procedures, pardon me, that are to be engaged in as a way of maintaining a secret or occult body of relationships and networks. And then during the 18th century, you get the Illuminati in Bavaria, you get the rise of the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, all that stuff. And forget all the hocus pocus and all the paranormal bullshit, because it is hocus pocus paranormal bullshit. These are politically important things in the sense that, apart from being networks and backroom connections and back channels between various political actors, the notion of arcane imperi is that these off-the-book rituals and procedures will be symbolically represented in an occult form, like the Bohemian Grove type of thing. The creepy thing about Bohemian Grove, and it kind of reminds me of like a creepy pasta episode, right? The Bohemian Grove thing suggests a kind of a druidic neo-pagan ritual, doesn't it? I mean, when you really look at it, right, and think about it. And I'll give you several, one classic, great historical example of this, which of course Carl Jung unfortunately got completely backwards. I got like a hate-love relationship with Carl Jung. I kind of like him and I don't like him. But when he really dropped the ball was when he developed his Jungian psychoanalytic theory of alchemy, right? It's all about spiritual transformation and transforming the animus into the spiritus, and the world soul, and all that Jungian archetypal individuation stuff. And we now think that most alchemical texts are actually code books for espionage operations. And that the great alchemist of all time, John Dee, the guy who's allegedly created Golem and a homunculus and was working out in the Alchemist Alley in Prague, which is actually a great place. I was at an Alchemist Alley, Alchemist Street. It's a fantastic place right next to the castle, and they kept it in really good condition. So I was really chuffed when I finally managed to make it to Alchemy Street, or the Street of Alchemists. So much of these things of arcane imperi are both concerned with political governance and with espionage and clandestine operations, which are mediated through occult imagery and symbolism and ritualism. I'll leave it at that.
There's one thing I did want to ask you about. I just remembered the Haight-Ashbury Clinic.
Yeah,
we got to talk about your writing on the Haight-Ashbury.
Well, I've got about a 5-page micro dense footnote on that in my Howard's Fuckpad book, my Ellroy book. Yeah, no, there's no doubt that Charles was plugged into a CIA operation concerning the administration and the examination of the effects of LSD in Haight-Ashbury, and that's how he got his supply, and that was really the key to building his following. He was simply a great source to get the asset from, and it was coming from somewhere. I mean, he wasn't making it himself.
Well, he preyed upon like runaways and kids that just wanted to have like sex and try drugs.
Yeah, well, I mean that's hasn't changed anything. But that's where that's where his pull came from. He came from the LSD, and that he was getting from uh, the the CIA operative who was running the clinic, whose name eludes me at the moment. I cannot remember. I haven't got
Joylon
my.
West.
That's exactly right. Yeah, Dr. West was a CIA guy to the core, and he was Charlie's supplier.
You like when you look at like Peter Dale Scott's work about drug trafficking and stuff that the government has been doing, do you look at the example of the Haight-Ashbury Clinic being a perfect place to try out MK Ultra because of the fact that there was such an infestation with drugs?
Yes, absolutely. And Peter, you have to check with Peter because I'm sort of like talking off the cuff here. Peter's theory, of course, is that the CIA had something to do with the Manson murders because one, it was an experiment in thought control or mind control, and two, they wanted to discredit the peace movement by manufacturing demon hippies from hell. I mean, if it was the worst possible thing of every, bourgeois, middle class, white American's nightmare about what their kids can turn into, they just threw it back at him. I said, "Here it is. This is what it's all about, right? This is the truth of the long hairs. Charlie Manson is where it all ended up.
Yeah, he did kill the hippie movement, even though he was saying he wasn't there for the murders and he wasn't a hippie, but somehow he got associated with it.
He actually, relate well.
It's the commune living that ended up the farm and everything is really what got him attached.
The evidence that I've looked at, and by the way, Bugliosi's book is terrible. I mean, it's a
Well, he
complete.
created Helter Skelter. There's no evidence for that.
Well, no, no, no. I mean, it's a really, really bad book. So I've looked at other things going well beyond Bugliosi, thank God, including The Family, which is a very, very good book. And it's Charlie's connection to the homicides is awful thin to get a conviction on what he was charged with. I would say at the most accessory before or after the fact, which is a serious charge. But I really do not find the direct personal responsibility and intent to make out a proper homicide charge there. I just don't see it. I
Yeah,
can be wrong,
I
but I
mean,
don't see it.
I interviewed Brad Schreiber, who interviewed the LAPD about some of the files that none of them really want to go public about. He wrote a book called Reverend's End about the Patty Hearst kidnapping.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I've not read it. I've heard of it.
but he when he interviewed these guys, you could have got Charles Manson on anything, drug charges, prostitution charges. A lot of people don't know that his ranch was raided in April and they were got him on some stolen car parts. But there had been murders that had been occurring before that they thought that Manson was involved in, and they never did anything about
Possibly.
it.
Span Ranch may have been a body dump site. That's for sure.
So I mean,
But again,
I don't know.
that doesn't prove Charlie's direct participation because he was linked to the Hells Angels, and the Hells Angels really did take care of people seriously, and they would have needed a dump site. See, that's the thing Bugliosi skates over, and I think that's even more important than Peter's mind MK Ultra theory. I think it's Charlie's connection with the biker gangs in Hollywood and the narcotics scene. I personally think that the Tate and Bianca murders, maybe not the Bianca so much, that just may have been like a bad loan debt problem, but certainly the Tate murders up into Polanski's place really strike me as a gussed up satanic ritual killing which covered up a drug related problem.
I'm with
I think it was narcotics related personally, made to look like this hippie from hell, um, bacchanalia.
There's a couple people that share that sentiment. A lot of, I think the official story is that just because Charlie was such a racist and the Tate, Bianca, and them were having a party with known Hollywood connections of African American people and stuff like that. That's why Charlie did it. But Bugliossi's model of Helter Skelter is there's no evidence for it. You know, these witnesses, these family members didn't come out and talk about Helter Skelter and Charlie talking about it until after those court cases started being proceeded. There was no discussion about it before. And then when they made the movie Helter Skelter, they had a door painted with the words Helter Skelter on it, and everyone thinks that's real, and it's not real. That was from a movie. It's not from the actual home.
And did you read Parkland?
I didn't read. Is that Jim DiGino's book?
No, that's Bugliosi's solution of the JFK killing. The Warren Report's correct.
Yeah, that's case closed.
No, Bugliosi? I thought
Yeah.
I thought Bugliosi wrote Parkland.
No, it's his tomb that he wrote on the JFK assassination, talking about how all conspiracies are garbage and there's no
Oh, that's
conspiracy in
true
the
too. But
JFK
I
case.
think the Parkland book is by Bugliosi, is it not?
It might be his as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, again, like I haven't got it up right in front of me, but yeah, I think so. It is.
What about
And
Parkland?
anyway, that's a serious whitewash.
Oh, well, I'm
Even
sure.
if you don't believe the all, all the alternative conspiracies, the Warren Commission has a lot objectively wrong with it. So
I mean, yeah, but if you look at the scandals of Bigelow, you got to look at the scandals in that trial of Charles Manson too. They put a prosecutor on the defendant's team to sabotage the court case.
yep, yep,
That's not right, but I mean, I guess they looked at Charles Manson as he needs to go away, and this is what we need to make sure he goes away for a long time.
yeah. Well, I mean, Charlie at that point may have been facing either you go along with this and we'll give you life without parole, or we'll execute you now.
Well, the government can fix people like Manson. Do you think he was unfixable?
Not sure.
We have
I don't.
lobotomies for this specific
Well, yeah.
reason. I hate to be that guy that mentions that, but whenever someone goes, Charlie Manson was unfixable, I go, oh, no, no, no. They can fix him, but it's what you deem as an ethical line of someone having a life afterwards.
Well, you read The Dark Knight by Frank Miller, right?
No.
The one that just changed the Batman mythos forever. Um, it's 4 volumes, and volume 3 is Batman really has to get rid of the Joker problem once and for all, right? I guess this is where I'm going to have to stop it. But I mean, this is my last thing for the day. Batman's, he's doing the cape thing, and he's zooming in down the Joker, who's like massacring hundreds of people over this state fair play park, right, the amusement park, and he says, Joker, the very first time I met you, I knew there was nothing wrong with you that I couldn't fix with my own 2 bare hands.
And he snapped his neck.
Yep. Sort of. The Joker actually winds up snapping his own neck, but that's a different story.
What a legend.
Yeah.
I'm the only person that could take me out.
No, I think I think Heath Ledger could have done it. I don't know about Yoquin so much, but Keith, pardon me, Heath, yeah, he could have done that.
The real secret is the real Joker's Yoko Ono.
Yeah, I think
To
so.
sabotage John Lennon's music career.
Yeah.
I'll
Well,
never forget Chuck Berry.
I'll tell you this. I got an even better one. The true Catwoman of the 1960s is not Julie Newmar, Eartha Kitt, or the third lady, the really nice, actually the nice Catwoman.
Anne Hathaway?
No,
Halle
no,
Berry?
no, back in the 60s. Anyway, it was
Judi
not them.
Dench?
No, no, it was
Margaret
not them.
Thatcher?
Nope, it was Tura Satana.
Oh,
Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill.
I would have liked
Look it
it
up.
better if it was Margaret Thatcher.
That was the real Catwoman.
Margaret Thatcher could easily play Catwoman.
Well, she did, but
That milk has gone sour. Uh, Eric, thank you again for giving me the time. Is there a place where people can find your links, man?
really haven't got links. You just have to look me up. Punctum Books is probably where the next thing's coming out. Because I got actually 2 in press at the moment, but Punctum, the one by The View from Howard's Fuckpad, The Deep State, Bad White Men, and the Weird Noir of James Ellroy is what you want to read if you're listening to this podcast. And you can look me up at Punctum Books, because I don't really go online much, because I'm not sure what I would be reading every day when I check my email. So yeah, you have to contact me through sources. If somebody wants to talk to me, they can contact you, Robbie, and they may forward a message to me, and I'll try to respond.
Okay.
How's that?
That sounds good. Thanks for putting that on me. Thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Stay tuned for next episode.